Yep, and we'll have a whole discussion about traffic. It's going to be great. There we go. All right, let me go ahead and open us with a word of prayer, and then we'll get formally. Let me go ahead and open us with a word of prayer, and we'll get formally started. Heavenly Father, we thank you for this opportunity to gather together, to think about our lives, to think about the way in which the liturgy in which we participate and celebrate on Sundays should roll backwards and forwards, affecting the week before and the week to come. May we engage in this profound act of theological reflection with our eyes fully open. Give us eyes to see and hearts that understand. And Lord, I ask you that you would help us make good use of this time and help us to see time in a new way, in a way that isn't to be mastered, but is defined by you and by your Son, and is to be participated in and celebrated and enjoyed. And we ask all of this in the name of your Son, Jesus Christ, our Lord. Amen. So we are on chapter 8. Sorry for any of you who were here last week when I wasn't. You probably know Michelle was in the hospital, but she's doing much better now. So thanks for your understanding and patience. Like usual, we'll just start by seeing if anybody has any opening thoughts on sitting in traffic, chapter 8. Nothing? Are you just getting warmed up? No.
I know sometimes I used to drive home and find myself at home before I realized that I'd left. So sometimes even driving, you're not aware of what you're doing. Unfortunately, that happened to me.
Yeah, there were a few times when I don't think everybody knows this, but when I was actually taking courses at Marquette and still living in Wheaton, Winfield, it was a 2-hour drive from my house to Marquette's, and I was doing that 3 days a week. There were days where I would get home and not realize, I sort of no recollection of actually having driven. It was very strange and disconcerting, but at least the Lord kept me safe.
I'm reminded of a biblical verse. It's in several places in the Old Testament where they talk about generations coming and generations going, and the non-biblical part of people always on the move. A lot of coming and going in the Bible. Had an Old Testament class years ago, and I remember the instructor saying that, and he just said, hey, nothing new under the sun. But we'll get to that later in the term.
That's funny. Anyone else have any opening remarks, opening comments? You can't manage time. Yeah. Yeah, right. I mean, it's fascinating in our attempt to be masters of our own universe, right? We want to take control of everything, including our time, and we teach time management courses, and sometimes my day is scheduled to death, right? And you look at your calendar, you've got these overlapping events, and you sort of realize that maybe we're overscheduled. But yeah, we certainly are attempting to be masters of our own reality, rather than submitting. There's some sections in here. I mean, I honestly, at one point thought, okay, you're highlighting too much stuff in this chapter. At a certain point, if you're highlighting the whole chapter, it just doesn't matter anymore. There's no point. I have my copy of Wright's first like major book, New Testament and the People of God, which I've read sort of over and over and over. And when I read it once with a black pen, and then the second time with a red pen, and then the third time with a pencil, and like by the fourth time, it's just like the whole page is just highlighted. And I thought, this is utterly unhelpful. Although it might be interesting at some point to go back and do like chronology to see like what I underlined when and why, and to kind of process what I was thinking. But buy a new book and see what happens. I don't just replace my friends like that, man. My books are sacred to me. Maybe. It is falling apart. Yeah.
What I had gotten out of it, that time revolves around God, not me. What he has done, what he is doing, and what he will do.
Yeah. Yeah, so that's the stepping into the church calendar bit, right? We live our lives by or you're supposed to live our lives by a different calendar, by a different ordering of the world that isn't, our ordering of time, and it's appropriate, don't get me wrong, it's baked right into the creation story, right? Sunrise, sunset, evening, morning, first day. How long the earth, I said this once. I said on my birthday that it feels rather pagan to celebrate the sun traveling around the earth. And I was like, oh no, that's not right. Yeah, the earth rotates around the sun. That's how we set our yearly calendars, and we have seasons and whatnot. We order our secular time on cosmology, on the way in which the universe is structured. And that's what God sort of describes in Genesis 1. But nonetheless, the church offers us something different, an ordering of time that isn't based on cosmology, but it's based on soteriology. It's based on what God has done, as you put it. I know you were copying from her, but as God has done, is done, and will do. And that's a much more theologically fruitful way to manage and organize our time. Anything else stands out that you want to chime in before we start? Oh, again, more. Let's go. Michelle, you've got to have stuff to say about time. I'm like certain of it.
We fast, then we feast.
We fast, then we feast. Yeah. Most people don't think about Advent and Christmas and Lent and Easter that way, although they certainly want you to. But the two major kind of feast celebrations in the church calendar are both preceded by periods of fasting. And if you're sort of paying attention, Advent is kind of a lesser fast, like it's a lesser season of penitence. And Christmas is, despite its prominence in our society, a sort of lesser celebration. Like the season of Christmas lasts for how long? 12 days, right? But Easter lasts for, right? So, I mean, it's even longer than that. It's 7 weeks. So we don't, like in Lent, we don't count Sundays, but in Easter, we count the Sundays. So it's even longer. The lesser fast precedes the lesser feasting, and then the greater fast precedes the greater feasting on Easter. So yeah, there's a rhythm and rhyme to the ordering of the church calendar. Anything else? Yeah.
So that's all great. How do these two inform each other? I mean, she's kind of blasting out of the water that our normal human, right? I'm going to wake up tomorrow morning and at somewhere between 5:30 and 5:45, I'm going to meet some guys. I'm going to do it the next 5 days and maybe next Saturday. And my life's going to be driven by all these things that I have to do because I have a job. How do these two interact with each other? How am I supposed to, I mean, there's whole quotes here that kind of say, oh, that really doesn't matter. you're just, keeping up with humanness, and that's fallenness. How do I?
Like, what quote makes you think that?
107. Our problem with time is social, cultural, and economic, to be sure. It's also a spiritual problem, one that runs right to the core of who we are as human beings. We come to believe that we, not God, are masters of time. So how do you, right? There's something here that's saying that, she's making a statement, right? That one of these views of time, the liturgical church view, is more important and should be governing our lives as opposed to the other. And how do you do that?
So, let me just say a couple things in response. The first thing is, I don't feel like her rejection of secular time is as strong as you're describing it. So maybe I'm wrong in that, and if anybody disagrees, they're welcome to chime in. But I never got the sense that she was rejecting it so much as calling people to participate. Right? The whole book is about taking the ordinary and secular and sort of layering on top of it or giving it theological context. So I never got the impression she was rejecting it.
Let me rephrase my question.
Okay.
How does a guy like me layer some more on top?
Yeah, and that's a really fair criticism, right? Because, you can't avoid the context of this, that she's a priest, right? She's a pastor. She's not even, if I understand her profession correctly or her position correctly, her husband is the rector of the church, and she is writer in residence. So her whole life has space to do these things, right?
I've been thinking this the whole time. This is cute. Thanks a lot.
Yeah.
I don't care. It's not that I don't appreciate your thoughts. I just don't see it, Coach.
Yeah.
For me, and gotta be a whole lot of other people right there in the same boat.
So do you think so let's start off with the premise that the kind of ordering of the world that you're describing, like the so-called secular ordering of the world, actually has its origins in Genesis 1, right? Like that evening and there was morning, there was the first day. So it's even the secular ordering has theology behind it, right? So that's the first premise. The second one would be, do you agree that our current view of time is askew?
Sure, but I think that a lot of that is the curse, where God said, hey man, you're going to have to work hard the rest of your life.
Right,
and
but
send us out, right?
Right, but we know like she makes that comment about how in Gulliver's Travels, I forget what the name of the beings are, but they think his watch must be his god, because he's constantly looking at it. And then she says, if we were to apply that today, it would be my cell phone, right? We are, I think, in the pre-digital age, in the pre-smartphones, digital watches, etc. Like, you didn't have a choice other than to live by the rhythms of morning and evening, right? There was just a sort of built-in, candles only last so long. Like, she makes that comment about, like, so long as we have electricity, the rhythms of time, the rhythms of the world don't really have to matter to me, because I can have light whenever I choose, right? It seems to me like what she's saying to a person like you, and not you in specific, but to a working class person, is when you are thinking about how you use your time, make sure you are, and that's what this whole book is about. Make sure that as you go through the mundane parts of your life, you are engaged in theological reflection about it. I don't think she's calling people to reject that, right? To stop making the peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, or just, stop making your bed or whatever, right? She's saying, she's trying to call people into deeper thought about the things that we do regularly without thinking about them, and the things that we do just sort of every single day, going through the motions, that there might be more here for us to think about. So I think there's an appropriate place, and I don't mean this about you, but there might be an appropriate place for someone whose life is overscheduled because we no longer have to fit everything into, well, the sun comes up at this time and goes down at this time, so we got to get our day in here, and when it's done, it's done. We can, I mean, think about myself, right? Like, I have completed several degrees, mostly because I have electricity and I could stay up until 4 a.m., and I didn't care about my health, and I didn't care about what mood I was going to be in the next day. I could overcome time. I could overcome, I could force more into a day than is supposed to be. And I wasn't theologically reflecting that. So I think that's what she's calling people to, not to like abandon what they're doing or to even say that it's bad, but to ask them to engage theologically in that rhythm of their lives, right? Again, I don't want to get personal, but I mean, I could see someone saying to someone whose life is overscheduled or who's running their own business and their life is overscheduled, do you really need to take this next job, right? Are you having space in your life for family, for church, for the things? And I know that you do, but like, I could see these questions. These are the questions I think she's trying to call to our minds, without rejecting the former, certainly. And I don't know about. I mean, again, my context is different than yours. My context is closer to hers than to yours.
So would she believe that? I mean, I don't care if people know I'm completely overscheduled. I always have a problem of whether I should take the next job and we should do it or not. And so, what do I? If I reflect enough on this, is the answer going to come to me? That's what I want to know. And how do you get to that place?
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? I mean, how do you figure that out?
Sure, right. And so this is, I mean, I hope you know me well enough to know that I rarely think there are ever like easy answers to any of this stuff, right? Like my answer to almost every political problem, theological problem, philosophical problem is it's complicated, right? Because like I think it is. I don't think Jesus gave easy answers. He spoke in riddles and puzzles and invited people into imagining the world as it should be and imagining how we might get from here to there in our everyday life, right? So I don't want to sit here and say, well, here's how you do it. Step 1, do this. Step 2. But what comes to my mind, right, is sitting with your wife and saying, am I available? Am I too overscheduled? Like you know, I mean, the word that always comes to my mind in these things is the word wisdom. And wisdom is always a collective effort. It's never just me sitting there being wise and solving a problem. Wisdom is a thing that you engage in corporately at the most intimate levels in your family with your closest to you, and then bridging out from there to your church, other family, friends, etc. And I would think if anyone it was able to be that open and to share those kind of conversations with people, you might begin to see an answer emerging. Maybe. But I don't want to sit here and say, here are the 3 steps for God. Here are God's 3 steps for managing your finances, or you know, for managing your iCal or whatever. Right? That's just not me. But I think wisdom is the answer here, like theological reflection and corporate wisdom.
So I've got a thought on what we're talking about. So I think we're our lives are lived in cycles, and not just one cycle. A lot of times we think of time just as a linear, but it's not like that. We have a daily cycle, like Kyle was saying. Hey, we have 5 days a week. We have or whatever. Our work cycle, our family cycle, and that's a cycle. That's an imminent cycle that's here in our face, and then we have another cycle, which is the stage, the season that we are in our lives. Okay, so we have different seasons. You're in the working season of your life. I'm in a retired in different seasons. I can't name them all, but and our daily cycle is cycling inside that other cycle, the seasons of our lives, and then the season of our lives is cycling within the larger cycle, the cycle that God has in mind for for our not just earthly life, but for our eternal life. And there are probably other cycles that's not coming to my mind, but those 3 cycles came into my mind, and they're not concentric. They just seem to be rolling inside each other. And obviously the outer cycle, the big cycle, is a cycle that God has intended for us and that is all-encompassing. But that's why it's complicated, because we have all these cycles inside each other, and we just kind of have to recognize it and appreciate that. Like she talks about standing in line at a grocery store, I think, or something. And and you're standing in line and somebody's got 48 items and you have one. And so sometimes you're really gracious and they let you go ahead, but sometimes you just got to say, okay, God, this is where I'm at. I used to get upset being in that situation, but okay, so less now, not always, but less, I get upset. I would say, God, okay, so why have you got me here? What should I be looking at or thinking about? So that's the cycle. It slows my cycles down. That's just something that came to mind about the cycles.
Yeah, I love that quote at the beginning when she says, but people honk as if to shake a sonic fist at the sky. In the face of our powerlessness, our stuckness, our mortal minutes counting down, we just honk in act of rage and protest that only adds noise, not movement. We're geese caught in a trap, honking. I love that quote to your comment about waiting in line and whatnot. Yeah.
One of the things I thought about when you were talking, I read a book one time. I don't remember the whole title, but part of the title was "I'm Too Busy." Was about being too busy. And when you started to read the book, in the foreword of the book, it said, if you have time to read this book in one sitting, you don't need it. Pass it to somebody else. And then in the directions were to just read one chapter at a time and then think about it. And the first chapter that you did that day, you wrote down your schedule for the whole week. So look at hourly, like what you could look at what your life, what you're doing. And then the next day, so you had to think about that. And then the next day, it asked you to write down, what do you want to be remembered for when you die? And you just wrote that and thought about that day. And then the third day, you picked it up and you compared those two to what you're spending your life doing. Is it what you want to be remembered for when you die? In other words, what's really important. And at that time, for me, I realized I was spending way too much of my life cleaning. I don't really care if I die if you say, wow, her kitchen floor was always sparkling every time you went, it was like, and then the next chapter of the book was figure out how to get rid of those jobs, get someone else to do them. I hired someone that was like, yeah, I want that done, but I don't need to do it myself. And so then you're more focusing your time on what's really but it took a step process like that. I don't think if somebody just said one sentence, I would have gotten it, or one chapter. It took like days of thinking of that. To is how you're spending your time. What's important?
Yeah, that's helpful.
One of the things I wanted to add is the fact that retirement, and it certainly was for me, is a kind of time of crisis. Because a lot of what I did before occupied a lot of time. I was highly scheduled and had to get things done, and all being a rector and all that sort of thing. And I found out that I was putting too much self-value in being busy and feeling like people needed me and that I was essential to everybody. And and entering into my retirement years, I'm still dealing with this to some extent, and discovering I have, all this time to do something different. And what does that mean, and what does it mean to my self-value, and who I am as a person? And I'm still dealing with that. Retirement is a time of change, and somewhat, I'd use the word crisis to some extent, because you have to make choices about how that time's now available to you and how it's going to be utilized, and it doesn't have to be centered upon my self-value. I mean,
Yeah.
it's a different orientation toward life for me.
And I think that's, to get back to Kyle's comment, the perhaps maddening part of this book, but also beautiful. I mean, she's calling, you talked about like when you're a rector and you're busy, right, and people need you, like those are all generally defined as good things, right? And we can put spin on, I mean, I could sit there and spin why it was a good thing for me to not care about anything else but getting classes done and degrees done and whatnot for years. But looking back on it, and as you're sort of describing, looking back on it, you can see the error underneath, right? She's calling us in the present to begin that theological reflection, to start asking ourselves why do we make our beds? Why do we make these sandwiches? What are we doing when we're stuck in traffic and we're frustrated? And to reflect on them theologically without, I think to your point, giving here's the easy 1, 2, 3 steps to sort of get from here to there. But she's calling us, I think rightly, to reflect on these questions that can oftentimes just be smoothed over because our cultures tell us it's the way we should be doing things, or our church tells us the way we should be doing things, or some grandparent or whatever, right? And things just aren't that simple, and we the things that we do without thinking are the things that probably define us the most. So it's important to start thinking about them. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm just reminded of how with medieval peasants, they didn't have a lot of choice. So the passage of time is something that, is sort of a given. You have a church calendar that sort of gives you those. In America, we have plenty of choice. Most of the things that we do are because we want to do them, or at some point we decided that they would be better than some other thing. Yeah. And so it just kind of calls us back to do the work of actually choosing. Yeah. We still have choice. Yeah. Yeah. We're all making choices every day, oftentimes without reflecting on them, and we need to be reflecting theologically on them. Yeah, absolutely. The second question she asks in the back is, what is waiting like for you? What do you feel as you wait? Father Lewis, you already sort of answered this a little bit. It's maddening for me. It is absolutely maddening. I've said more than once in my life, I can waste my time, but you dare not waste my time, right? That's sort of my mental makeup. I can waste my time, but you don't get to. I'm not going to wait around. And that's a bit of an overstatement, but waiting for me is just, and we live in an age, right, where I went to order something on Amazon this morning, and the big thing said delivered today. And then it said, if you order $35 or more. And I was like, oh, I don't want to, it creates this sort of mental, do I need to order $35 to get it today? How important is it that I have it today as opposed to tomorrow, right? Waiting for me is just absolutely maddening. It's absolutely maddening. And I imagine I'm not the only one. So then she asks, with that quote from Hans Urs von Balthasar, patience, where he says patience is the basic constituent of Christianity. What did you guys think about that bit where she had that quote from him? Let me read it just in case. God intended man to have all good, but in God's time. And therefore all disobedience, all sin consists essentially in breaking out of time. Hence the restoration of order by the Son of God had to be the annulment of that premature snatching at knowledge, the beating down of the hand outstretched toward eternity, the repentant return from a false, swift transfer of eternity to a true, slow confinement in time. Patience is the basic constituent of Christianity, the power to wait, the power to persevere, to hold out, to endure to the end, not to transcend one's own limitations, not to force issues by playing the hero or the titan, but to practice the virtue that lies beyond heroism, the meekness of the Lamb which is led. I love that quote.
So I don't really see how Adam and Eve's sin is. I'm not really seeing how Adam and Eve's sin is lack of patience. It's just disobedience. What are they waiting for? Because they're already in the garden where everything is perfect, and they're just said, eat from every tree but this one, and then Satan comes and tempts to distrust their security in God, to distrust their significance in God, to distrust their acceptance of him, not impatience.
In part. So there's certainly a layer he's adding to that story as he draws from it, like certainly, right? There's a couple things to point out there. Was the garden perfect in the sense of could not get any better? That's not exactly clear theologically, right? So we talk about in Easter Adam's happy fault that gained for us such a glorious redemption, right? Like, as I talked about in the sermon a little bit, like redemption is more glorious than creation itself. That's why God is praised forever. So that's one way to look at it, in the sense that there is still, my point is there is still an eschatology baked into the creation story. It probably isn't apparent on the surface, but in the grand scheme of the story of the Bible, there appears to be the case that not everything was exactly the way it should be there at creation. It was the way God wanted it for that moment. But the perfect world won't have a tempter in it. Right? The perfect world won't have, like when we get to the new creation, there will not be a tree from which we cannot eat. So Hans Urs von Balthasar is starting with the premise that it is God's intention to give all good things to his people. So he's layering this over the story, but essentially saying, if the knowledge of good and evil was a good thing that humanity is supposed to have, then at some point God would give it to his people. But Adam reached out and took it before God was ready to give it to his people. Now, I think you could make an argument, well, that's not exactly there in the creation story, but that's how he's reading it. That if it was, God will give all good things to his people, and if it was a good thing, then eventually, and it doesn't appear, I mean, you're right in one sense, like, the knowledge of good and evil is not a bad thing. It's the act of disobeying God and reaching out and taking it that's bad, right? He's saying that Adam should have thought, if God wanted me to have this, at some point he will give it to me. And Adam reached out and took it before God had given it to him. That's how he's reading it. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Okay. But that's a good question. Sitting in traffic, stuck is one, I mean, this is mad. This is like mad. This sentence is so true that it frustrates me. Sitting in traffic, stuck, is one of the very few times in my day where I embody the true state of my whole human existence. On the way, already but not yet, living as a creature in the in-between, waiting. Yeah. Yeah. And that's, in case anyone didn't pick up on it, this is also baked into our little tagline, right? A church on the way. Like, a church on the way is a church that will never arrive. I mean, one day we will in the eschaton when God gives this to us, but between now and then, we are always in that liminal space between who we have been and who we will eventually become. That word liminal gets used a lot, and it probably should be used even more in reflecting on Christian theology. What about the liturgical year? What about her? What was that sentence she has? Human-made time might remind us of something real, but mostly it was a product, an invention made to sell something, made to sell snowmen to Southerners. I mean, she has a point, right? Like, even, I guess, in Florida as well, where the seasons don't really change, we have, seasons and all the regular trappings of the seasons, all the commercial aspects still come and go, just like the leaves were actually falling and like there was actually snow on the ground. Yeah. What about the liturgical calendar? I mean, I think for most people, correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think it has much effect on our thinking, on our sort of day-to-day life. Is that fair?
That's fair, but I think as we learn to appreciate it more, then it begins to. But yeah, I agree with what you said. Whether you're sometimes when you're in Lent or when you're in Easter season or ordinary time, if we're not conscious of this liturgical calendar, it doesn't have much of an effect on our lives. But I think that the more we ask for it to be at the front of our minds, it will.
Yeah.
It should. It will.
It does have a lot in my life, and I think a lot of it is because of Lent. I was raised Roman Catholic, so Lent was really, really big. And sometimes it frustrates me that I think that we do Lent, or at least I do Lent, so big, and I don't think we do Easter big enough. Easter, the actual Easter day and Easter Vigil, yeah, but then it just seems like 2 days after Easter, Easter's gone, and it doesn't.
I mean, the candle's still out.
Yeah, and I look, and there's flowers, but it's not as Easter's. I don't think we celebrate Easter as big as we do Lent, and I think it's way more important.
Linda, I hear what you're saying. It's an interesting thing too. When I walk the parks and stuff, I'll tell people Happy Easter, and they'll look at me like I'm crazy, and I'm saying, well, it's 40 days long, and it's actually more than that. It never really ends, but that's just like a little conversation starter.
Yeah, the same with Christmas. Everybody, not everyone. People take the Christmas tree down the next morning. Christmas is over. It's like, no, it's not. I don't think we celebrate long enough.
Good luck with that.
Yeah.
We've been waiting to put up not something to drive our house. We have a creche, right? We have no other decorations. So we have this creche, and it's one light on it. We've tried to wait and wait and wait to put it up. And we've tried to keep it for 12 days after. And we look like fools. People are like, what the deuce are these people doing? And so far, I don't think it's made any difference.
Well, Kyle, if this makes you feel any better, we have neighbors that it took me a couple of years to notice that they have the light up nativity set in the yard, and they always have the wise men way on the other side of the yard. And they bring them over little by little. And when I realized they do that every year, I take a box of chocolate over to their house every year and thank them for doing that. Because the wise men weren't there on Christmas Eve.
Your point is there is somebody else.
Yeah. I'll give you their address, and you can go by their house.
And if you wait like us to get a Christmas tree, it's free. Because I went on Christmas Eve morning to get a Christmas tree, and they gave it to us for free.
Wow. This has been Thrifty Shopping with Michelle Collins. She says, I don't know exactly where I am on the books. Unfortunately, this doesn't have page numbers on it. She says, I think actually this is someone else. Dorothy Bass at Receiving the Day. She says, we delude ourselves into believing that if we can just get everything done, if we can only tie up all the loose ends, if we can even once get ahead of the crush, we will prove our worth and establish ourselves in safety. Our problem with time is social, cultural, and economic, to be sure, but this is a quote you were reading earlier, but is also a spiritual problem, one that runs right to the core of who we are as human beings. Indeed, these distortions drive us into the arms of false theology. We believe that we, not God, are the masters of our time. We come to believe that our worth must be proved by the way that we spend our hours, and that our ultimate safety depends on our own good management. And this is no longer a quote. The reality is that time is a stream we are swept into. Time is a gift from God, a means of worship. I need the church to remind me of reality. Time is not a commodity that I control, manage, or consume. The practice of liturgical time teaches me day by day that time is not mine. It does not revolve around me. Time revolves, this is a quote that you were at. Time revolves around God, what he has done, what he is doing, and what he will do. And then in the next section, because of Christ's work, we wait with expectation. We replace the despair that the passing of time inevitably brings, ashes to ashes, dust to dust, with faith. If we have died with him, we shall also live with him.
So all of that is true, and I've told you this quote. It bothers me when people say, I didn't have time to do that. No, it's not that you didn't have time to do that. It's that you chose not to prioritize it. So there is, in all that quoting that she's saying, there's truth to that, but it's all not just dependent on God. There is, you have to make some priorities as to, am I going to wake up and do a prayer, morning prayer, daily devotion, what have you, right? Kyle has very limited choices in his time, but he still can make a choice to carve out time to spend with the family or help with family chores or go be healthy by disc golfing, what have you. So it's not totally, God's given us the gift of time, and we still have to make priorities of how we're going to choose to use it.
Yeah, 100%. So, I think I don't think she would disagree with anything that you just said. Maybe I'm wrong, but I don't think that. I think what I take out of this is this is significant for me because this is not really how I think. She's calling me to recognize my own finitude, not just in the grand scheme of my life, but in the rhythms of a day, right? And that quote is saying, as people, who tend towards overachievement, I'm gonna do as much in this day as I possibly can, and if I start to run out of time, I start to get sleepy, I'll drink another coffee, I'll pop a 5-hour energy, I'll turn the lights on even though it's midnight outside so that I can continue to read, I can continue to work on this project, and get more done despite the fact that God has given me a day, and there's supposed to be evening, and there's supposed to be morning, and there's a time for rest and a time to sleep, a time to work and a time to sleep, and those sorts of things. You're absolutely right. It's not an excuse within the confines of a healthy, balanced day to not get things done and then just go, well, I ran out of time. How we use that time is also part of the equation, using it well, prioritizing things that matter, etc. But I think she's looking more at the broader problem in our culture of people trying to accomplish more in a day than a day is supposed to have in it, right? Like most things.
I think I would argue, though, that both are actually equally a problem within society, because as much as people try to put so much in, just like Linda was alluding to, there's many things that people don't even need to be doing that they're fitting into the day, right? And how some of us, including myself, how I choose to even use my quote-unquote rest time or downtime, is it edifying to me?
So I'm going to rest. I'm going to read a book, right?
Well, no. Like, what book are you watching? What movie are you watching?
Right.
Those kinds of things, right?
Yeah.
Is this making me a better sojourner?
Right.
Or not?
Yeah, I mean, if we want to, we can talk about the balance between the two. It feels to me like the overindulgence on time is more problematic, but it's certainly problematic of how we spend our time as well, and using it well, and prioritizing the things that we need to do to be healthy and spiritual and all those things as well. Absolutely. We're running out of time here. But we're going to respect no, pun definitely intended. I always find that weird. People make puns and then say no pun intended. Like, no, you definitely intended that. What are you doing? She talks about Tertullian, and I think this is a quote again. She says, "The singular mark of patience is not endurance or fortitude, but hope. To be impatient is to live without hope." This gets back to that God will give us all good things in time. Patience is ground in the resurrection. It is life oriented toward a future that is God's doing, and its sign is longing, not so much to be released from the ills of the present, but in anticipation of the good to come. That's a hard. I hope we talked about this more, but I think we're out of time. But she gets into this bit about what? Yeah, no, I know. I mean, this is the problem, right? Like, but it's I mean, to get to apply it to right now, like the other option would be to try and keep going, cram it all in, go past 10 o'clock. Now the musicians aren't getting ready, and we're not getting ready for the soundboard and the, you know what I mean? Like this is the problem. So being able to just say, we've talked about it enough, and we can move on is the thing that I need to learn, because I want to just keep jamming it in. That being said, she talks about not abandoning. It's just recognition that we live in hope. We're a people who are waiting for a future that God has promised, but also actively engaged in the process of bringing that future into the present. And that's a hard balance to find, I think, in preaching and practically speaking. You find people usually on one end of the spectrum, right? They're so heavenly minded they're of no earthly good, or they're so earthly minded that they don't really have, there's so much about social justice and whatnot, they kind of forsake all the eschatology bits. What we really need is a thorough and robust inaugurate eschatology. Like, we need the ability to think about our present as the moment in which God's future has already broken in and is already on its way, but has not yet arrived. That's why I didn't exactly like the traffic metaphor. I understood it in a sense, and I really liked when she said, what would it mean to just stop on the freeway and set up our own little town, as if the destination no longer mattered, right? And that's the challenge, to live in people who are getting up and meeting people at 5:30 and working Monday through Friday, and I think you said maybe Saturday, and trying to do the best for our kids and our spouses, and trying to be good at our jobs, and all the other things that society and culture and family and people tell us we absolutely have to be doing, and just taking a step back and saying, what? You should be doing all those things. No, I mean, yes, but to what extent, right? I mean, did I I don't know. I think a lot of us live with, I'll just speak about myself, and we're out of time, but I think, I live with, and to use Michelle's language, like an unhealthy balance of priorities. We're trying to do too much, and we're trying to do the wrong things. And
Was there a comment? Is that what you're pointing? Oh, yeah,
Yeah,
okay.
just between the Scylla and Charybdis of doing, way too much, trying to cram too much into a day,
Yeah.
or making excuses for yourself and not getting done what you need to. You see Jesus, who could have an infinite number of things to do in his earthly ministry, but he goes off to a quiet place and he prays.
Yeah.
And in the Spirit, he is then led in the mission that the Father has given him. And
Yeah.
so he's able to do precisely what he needs to do.
Yeah.
I've struggled with that, and it seems to me the only thing that you can do is really to be led by the Spirit. How do you determine what that is? And you're right, Kyle, that it's very hard to know, but that's why we have the Spirit, because we are led by God. We are given by God exactly what it is we need to do. And he has an imagination far grander than ours, so the choices that we don't even think of. Do we have to live in the suburbs? Do we have to live in Florida? Do we have to live in America? Do we have to have this or that or the other? He's the one who knows.
That's well said. Let's just close with this sort of quote from Jamie Smith. As Smith puts it, we will always sit somewhat uneasy in the present, haunted by the brokenness of the now. The future we hope for, a future when justice rolls down like waters and righteousness like an ever-flowing stream, hangs over our present and gives us a vision of what to work for in the here and now as we continue to pray, your kingdom come. Heavenly Father, I just ask you for me, for patience, for the ability to learn to wait in my everyday life as I learn to wait for the grand, great things that you have promised. Lord, I pray that you would, as we make decisions about the future of our church, that you would help us to wait, to make sure that we are not trying to do too much, that we are not trying to step beyond the limits of our finitude, but are using the gifts that you have given us in ways that you would want us to use them. And we ask this in the name of your Son, Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. Thank you, guys. We'll do chapter... Oh, wait. Will we be here? Yeah, we'll be here. Yeah. So we'll do chapter 9 next week.